You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna, but today's case is about a teacher who was murdered by his students. This is a case that shocked the nation. A reminder that age doesn't determine evil, the mind does. A murder committed by a gang may not seem unusual, but this isn't the normal gang. It's much, much worse, but not for the reasons you may think. I also want to thank Scentbird for sponsoring this portion of the video. They are a company that I am seriously obsessed with. Scentbird allows you to try all of the fancy and expensive perfumes without having to pay for the full bottle or the full price. You can test new scents every single month, ones that come in these adorable little tubes that are the perfect size to be able to take with you if you ever want to reapply. But they aren't the usual sample size. They can actually last a month long. With a subscription service, you can actually skip a month as well if you don't want to get any perfumes for that month. You can also choose from 600 luxury perfumes that you have always wanted to try, and if you have no idea what you like, there's also a quiz that you can take. Now, I actually went with Bulgari Goldia the Roman Night, Dolce & Gabbana the One, and Michael Germain Sexual Paris. Now, I love deep amber sexy scents, and if you do too, I'll have these linked below. I think my favorite though would have to be the Sexual Paris, and it comes in this cute little bottle and this cute little tube, and this one smells so good. It just smells like a luxury item, but like one that you just picked up from the store, and it's so fresh and you feel like that brand new feeling. I just can't even describe it. It smells rich. It's the perfect opportunity to be able to try these out when you know that the full bottle is something you don't want to spend a ton on and then hate it. So this subscription is usually $15 a month, but I got you guys a discount code for 30% off if you use the code LB30, and that will get your first month at $10. So if that is something that you want to try out, then make sure to go to the link down below and type in the code LB30. It would also be a wonderful Valentine's Day gift for, your loved one. But thank you to Scentbird for sponsoring this portion of the video. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 1996 in Florida, and Mark Charles Sweebies was a 32-year-old man who was living in Pine Manor in Fort Myers. He lived on his own, he had his own house, and he had been born on October 7th of 1963. He grew up in the area with his parents and his 4 siblings. He was the second youngest, but he really didn't take on the characteristics of a younger child. He was kind of more like the oldest. He wanted to help out in any way. He wanted to teach everyone, and that would kind of lead on to his older adult years as well. Now, at first, he had gone away briefly to join the Marines, and when he came back, he actually came back to his hometown of Fort Myers and decided to stay there. Mark was said to be the kindest man with a passion for music, and that led him to working as a band teacher for Riverdale High School. Mark adored helping and teaching students, and he was known to be an upstanding and loving person around the community. Everybody loved him. He always had so much to offer everyone, and he would give it to them without expecting anything back. It turned out, though, that he did have enemies, but no one would have ever thought to look their way. But looking into it deeper, people noticed that Riverdale High School wasn't one that had children coming from lives of luxury and comfort. They were coming from broken homes, and oftentimes they didn't have a ton of money or a ton of support. But Mark Sweebies did everything he could to make his students feel like they were so important. But on Tuesday, April 30th, in the late evening, investigators were called to Pine Manor suburb. Gunshots had been fired. 2 different people had called 911 from this community, and by 11:35 p.m., the investigators showed up, and the sheriff was also dispatched. Now, when investigators came to the crime scene, it didn't take them long to actually find it because the door was wide open. And as soon as they got to this door, where the neighbors had claimed that the gunshots were from, they saw him. The body of a man lying in the doorway, deceased. The welcome mat was soaked in blood, and Mark Sweebies had been murdered. Now, it appeared as though he had just opened his door and been shot instantly. There was no sign of forced entry. Investigators searched the area for evidence as a crowd gathered around from members of the community who had heard all of this happening and wanted to see what had happened. Most reporters and first responders weren't there yet, though, because there was a crash on the interstate nearby that they had gone to first. But slowly everybody did begin to get to the murder scene. Investigators found blood on the walls as well as shell casings scattered around, and there was also bullet holes in the walls as well. But Mark was taken for an autopsy, where it was soon found that he had been shot twice, once in the head and once in the pelvis/butt region. They found his wallet in his pants, which still contained $65. This is something that was actually a good tip, a good clue that they had, because this meant that this was not robbery. They hadn't even tried to take his wallet or his money. A local reporter named Jim Greenhill said that this was very unusual for this community, that almost nobody dies randomly, that it was usually due to drugs, sex, a toxic relationship, or, something that they had a history of being involved with prior. But with Mark, that wasn't the case. Nobody in the community would have thought that they could just open their door and have been shot dead. But that's what it appeared had happened here. Investigators were having a really hard time finding a motive at all. They had found strange things inside of Mark's car, and this was a fire extinguisher, some canned peaches, gloves, and staplers. Now, these were all kind of random and weird, but they didn't really have a connection to each other, and there was no reason for them to believe this had caused a murder or had anything to do with it. Mark's family was contacted at this point, and Mark's father ended up calling his daughter, who was Mark's sister, and her first thought was not murder. It was that he was in a car accident. This was how unusual this seemed, and nobody would have believed that Mark was a target. Investigators had then been talking to neighbors, and they had some statements of people saying that they heard a very loud car and then 2 gunshots. But the thing was, everybody had different versions of what the person driving it looked like, what the car itself looked like. No one could really say for sure, and it was dark outside. They did find a voice on Mark's answering machine, though. This was of a woman who was saying to Mark that she was sorry that she couldn't be with him that night. And then she asked him to call him back, and she hung up the phone. Now, she didn't give her name, and neighbors had also said they had seen a woman coming and going from Mark's place recently. She was white, she was blonde, she drove a convertible, and she had only been coming, as recent as a few weeks, a few months. She hadn't always been seeing him or had always stayed there. As investigators tried to find a killer and a motive, they began to wonder if the gunshot to his pelvis butt region was an indicator that this could possibly point to sexual feelings being involved. And they ran with this theory, and the media even reported that it was a deadly love triangle, and that something to do with relationships had caused this. And that's when rumors began flying all around Riverdale High School as far as who Mark was involved with, if, he ever had a girlfriend, and anything like that. And that is when a name was given to investigators: Paula Dodd. Now, she was a fellow teacher who had been spending a lot of time with Mark and who had just recently broken up with her boyfriend the night of Mark's murder because she wanted to be with Mark. It was said that that is the reason why she couldn't be with Mark the night of his murder, and why she left a voicemail, because she was with this man breaking up with him. Police zeroed in on Paula and the man that she had been with prior to Mark, who she had broken up with. This was a man named Bob Mann, and he was questioned at his home, and that is where he lived with his wife. That's right, Bob Mann had been seeing Paula Dodd, who broke up with him, but he also had a wife at home. And he had just brought another woman into the investigation because he was not married to Paula. He was married to her. Paula was just his girlfriend. This was now a love square. But investigators talked to Bob, and he claimed that he was with his wife that whole night. However, he did know Mark, the fact that he was a band teacher, but his wife also had no idea he was having an affair. Bob Mann also admitted his car needed a tune-up, which could be why it was so loud at the crime scene. So basically, everything was pointing to him having a motive and him being at the scene. Yet there was no real evidence to bring him in. After this, everyone in this love square, triangle, whatever you want to call it, were ruled out because they could really find no connection, even though it would have given an amazing motive. Not an amazing motive, but you know what I mean? It would be a very concrete motive that Bob would have wanted to kill this man who had taken away his girlfriend. But now investigators were back to square one. And Mark's sister said that she talked to him the night before his murder and everything was normal. She said that he was actually going to be having an ice cream social the next day with his kids. Now, he was a band teacher, like I said, and he would host these ice cream socials with his band students at high school, inviting the middle school students to come as well. They would get ice cream, they would be introduced to Mark and the other band students, and it was just basically to get them to want to join band. Mark was always really excited about these and the opportunity to meet these new students and to bring them in and to get them interested in music. After talking to some students, they found that this ice cream social did happen the day Mark was murdered, but that everything went fine and that they all left at 9:30 and went home. And so now investigators were at a loss. Why was Mark so violently and seemingly for no reason killed? Well, they were about to find more answers than they ever thought was possible, and a group of killers that they would have never expected. You see, 3 days after the murder, investigators got their first real tip. It was from a girl named Julie Chouard, who had dropped out of high school, but who had been going to this high school and had called to confess that her boyfriend had admitted he was at Mark's home the night of the murder. This was a boy named Craig Lesh, and he was brought in immediately. He told Julie that he had been with a boy named Kevin. Julie had immediately gone to her mother with no expression on her face, told her everything that Craig had just told her, and her mother then took her to the sheriff's department to officially tell them. But Craig Lesh was a high school student, and he was brought in and immediately said that he did tell Julie this. She wasn't lying, but he lied to her. He said that he wanted empathy and love from her, and so he decided to come up with a story to tell her. And investigators were beginning to get really disappointed that he had just lied and made this up, and that they were going to have another dead end. However, the more they talked to Craig, the more he said. And finally, he was claiming that he wasn't there, but he did know who killed Mark that night. Craig claimed that it was more than one person. It was a whole gang of them, and that this wasn't the usual type of gang because it was made up of teenagers. It was called the Lords of Chaos, and murder was not their only plan of action. A reign of terror had begun due to them much prior than that. You see, Fort Myers and the community had noticed a recent increase in crime, but they had no idea why until now. You see, reporter Jim Greenhill could not believe this was the truth. He claimed that when he made it to the crime scene of Mark, he even thought to himself, what if one of Mark's students killed him? And it was kind of just like a crazy thought in his head, and that's why he laughed at it, because he thought that it was so improbable. But it turned out that it was even more than possible. That's what this boy was saying had really happened. What this town didn't know was that this group of teens had been able to change this area that was a safe community into this place where people feared to live, where crime was running amok. All because they were said to want to enter a life of crime. But I'm getting ahead of myself because, you see, to really give you the full story, I'm going to have to take you back. and this was a month before Mark's murder. Now, 4 boys went to an abandoned property on March 24th, and they would park 2 Jeep Cherokees and light them on fire. They would then run to a location where they could watch them burn but could not be caught as investigators arrived at the scene. Investigators had no idea they were there, and when they finally got the fires out, they located the VIN numbers on these Jeeps. They ran it through the database. No owners were found, and this meant that these Jeeps had been stolen right off of a dealership's lot. Now, they quickly learned that since this Jeep didn't belong to anybody, now no leads were ever found in this case, and these boys got away with it. But they didn't stop there. These boys began doing anything rebellious they could think of. They were breaking into cars, buildings, they were vandalizing anything. They were tearing up Bibles in a church bus, they were setting huts on fire, and the whole time, investigators didn't know who was doing this, and they thought that it was just different people. And next, their MO escalated to bombing. Well, sort of. You see, a Walmart worker at a Walmart pharmacy got a call one day, and this was from someone who told him to evacuate the store. His employee thought it was a prank call and hung up. And then the caller called again and said that there was a bomb in the store and they needed to evacuate. Again, the Walmart worker cussed him out and hung up, thinking this was seriously a prank, and they were sick of it. At the 3rd call, that is when this caller told the employee where to find the bomb. And he went to look, and sure enough, it was there. 100 customers were ushered out of this Walmart. Investigators were called, and they found that this bomb was actually a device that was a soda can filled with brake powder with wires duct taped to the side. It wasn't a real bomb, but it sure looked like it. The first death came next. This was at a restaurant called The Hut. It was closed during this time, and when the police were called, it was on fire. Now, there were actually 2 exotic birds called macaws inside, and they were, priced at about $3,000. And they were these wonderful, majestic birds. And one of them actually ended up dying in the fire. And this was because the birds couldn't get out of their cages, and they had to sit there and suffer. It was found that dry palm tree foliage and flammable liquid was used to create these flames. This was the first death caused by the Lords of Chaos, and investigators still didn't know they existed, and they weren't stopping there. It was now 10 days before Mark's murder, and another bombing would occur. This time, it was real. This was at a Coca-Cola plant that was basically a building where they used to make the bottles, and it exploded, blasting glass all over onto the local interstate. Thankfully, this was a vacant location. Nobody worked there anymore, but the police did find 10 propane tanks inside that had been used to set this fire. It caused around $100,000 in damage, yet this was another investigation that went nowhere. These boys believed they were getting away with everything, so why would they stop their crime spree? So Craig Lesh was finally admitting that the Lords of Chaos were responsible for all of these unsolved cases. He then gave the names of the other members. This was Kevin Foster, Pete Magnotti, Chris Black, and Derek Shields, and they were all going to be brought in as well. They all looked so innocent, it was hard for anyone to believe they were involved and that they would have killed their teacher. But Derek Shields began to talk almost immediately, and he said that on April 30th, the night that Mark was murdered, the gang were going to rob a Hardee's. And they ended up not doing this. They didn't have any intention of killing anyone either, but they had previously stolen clothes from Dillard's because they were going to have a grad night at Walt Disney World, and Kevin had wanted to get a costume that made him appear like he worked at Walt Disney so he could go and shoot the minorities. But they ended up not doing that because a bomb that they tried to use there didn't work, and they found themselves at Riverdale High School instead. They decided to rob the school. And so they used a bleach bottle full of gasoline with a lit rag, threw it in through a window, and then went to rob the school. Derek said that Chris stayed outside as the lookout, and he, Pete, and Kevin went inside to get certain things like a fire extinguisher, canned food, staples, and gloves. You heard that right. This is when Derek said they came in contact with Mark Sweebies, because if you remember, he was at the school that day for an ice cream social. He was leaving when he noticed these boys outside around a payphone, and he noticed these items, and he immediately got them all, put them in his own car, and told the boys he would be calling the resource officer the next school day, which was the next day. Hearing this, investigators finally believed they had a motive. Derek had said that Kevin said that the boys needed to do something about Mark, and that is when Chris said the words that would forever change everyone's life. He said, "Someone has to die tonight." Derek said he only went along with this because he was trying to get them to not kill Mark. He was trying to stop them. But he said that they were figuring out Mark's address by calling 411 on the payphone and were able to get it. They then called the number that was, matched that address, and it was Mark on the answering machine, so they knew where to find him. Everything next, he said, happened so quickly. Kevin ran home to get his shotgun and pellets, and Chris and Pete stayed in the car. On their way there, Chris was said to be singing his own version of Santa Claus is Coming to Town, where he said, "He sees you when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake, he knows if you've been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake. Oh, you better watch out, you better not cry, better shut up and prepare to die. Kevin Foster's coming to your house." Derek was told that since he was one of Mark's band students and the closest to him, he had to go and ring the doorbell so Mark would answer to him. Now, that's exactly what Derek did, but he said that he was praying that Mark would not answer the door. But unfortunately, he did, and as soon as the door opened, Derek ran away, and Kevin basically ran in and shot Mark 2 times. Investigators were then let on as to why Mark was shot in the pelvis butt region as well, and this was because Kevin Foster believed that Mark was gay, and he didn't support him in that, and so he shot him there too. So because of who Kevin believed that Mark loved, he was shot once again. Now, I'm not sure if Mark was gay, bisexual, or any member of the LGBTQ+ community, but that is not a reason to kill him or shoot him. The night after Mark's murder, the gang then decided to rob a restaurant where Pete and Derek worked. They had a car filled with guns, and they went to pick up their newest member of the gang. However, as they arrived at his home, they were all arrested. As the lights flashed, Kevin looked to the other members and said, "See you in hell." Now, all the boys were brought in for questioning at this point, including the newest member that they were there to pick up, named Brad Young, as well as 2 other gang members who were named Chris Burnett and Thomas Toron. Now, the other investigators went to search all of their homes to find evidence linking them to the crimes and to Mark's murder, and they took computers, notebooks, weapons, anything, and they found in Kevin's home more than 20 guns. Immediately, investigators knew that the oldest member, 18-year-old Kevin Foster, was the mastermind and the leader of the Lords of Chaos. He got guns from his parents' pawn shop whenever he wanted, and they also found out that this gang had a symbol of their own. It was said to be a math problem that Kevin missed on a test while at school, and Pete turned it into this logo. But to tell you how these boys got to this point, I want to tell you about their past and see if that has any correlation. You see, Kevin Foster had moved a lot as a child, and his mother remarried a few different times, but by middle school his family was more stable and he was getting amazing grades. However, when he moved up to high school, he cared more about girls and guns than school. By 14 years old, he acquired his first gun by getting it as a birthday present. He had a criminal record as well for driving violations, and he was known to this gang as God. They all had different names, and his was God because that is what he believed he was. He was also obsessed with the Oklahoma City bombing that occurred a year prior, as well as the Waco massacre that occurred 3 years prior. Now, Pete Magnotti had a veteran father, and when he retired, the family moved to Fort Myers. Pete quickly became friends with a boy named Kevin in his neighborhood. And, Pete was said to be brilliant with an IQ of 153. He spent his time making dark comic books instead of studying, instead of doing anything. He would also write Lords of Chaos manifestos, and he was known to the gang to be fried. That was his name. He was Kevin's first member as well, and a manifesto was found at Pete's home saying, "Lee County is dealing with a formidable foe with high caliber intelligence, balls of titanium alloy, and a wicked destructive streak. Be prepared for destruction of biblical proportions, for this is the coming of a new God, whose fiery hand shall lay waste the populace. The games have just begun, and terror shall ensue." Chris Black was also a very smart boy who quickly became friends with Pete because they found out that each of them loved comics, so they began hanging out. They were also both bullied in school, so it just made them easy to be able to connect. Now the three of them began hanging out. Chris was called Slim, and finally there was Derek Shields, who was added to the gang. Now he had a father who had left when he was 5 years old. His grandfather then passed away, and he was really, really close with his brother. His brother Fred was then murdered. Now, at this point, he was working while going to school and really trying to help out his family with bills and be a good student. But he then got in with these boys who were outcasts like him, and everything changed. They called him Mob. Now, at the same time as he was hanging out with them, he was also hanging out with band students and Mark, band teacher. And Mark even wrote a letter of recommendation for Florida Tech for Derek because he wanted him to succeed. But Derek's home life was getting bad when their landlord kicked his family out, and the gang then told him that they would help him get revenge on this landlord. Now, I'm not exactly sure what they did to get revenge, but after this, Derek really felt like the gang had his back, and so he chose them over Mark. He said that night he was begging Kevin not to kill Mark, but Kevin just kept saying that it was either him or Mark and was pointing the gun at him. Now, of course, like I said, there were other members who were slowly working up the ladder to be full members of this gang, and that was Chris Burnett, who was called Red, as well as Thomas Toron, who was called Dog. There were also newest members that were Brad Young and Craig Lesh, who weren't even given names yet. However, if you remember, Craig was the one who initially came in and told investigators all of this, even though he wasn't even a part of the gang yet. And Brad Young and Craig Lesh were released, but Chris Burnett was told that he was going to be charged with second-degree arson for bombing the Coca-Cola plant. He was told if he pled guilty, he would only get 2 years with 10 years probation, and that was also if he testified against the Lords of Chaos leader, Kevin. He decided to do this. He was given this deal because Chris told investigators that Kevin kept saying how cool it was that Mark's face just blew off. He said that Kevin told him that he shot Mark in the butt and that Derek, Pete, and Chris were with him. This same deal was also given to Thomas Tyrone for 1 year in jail with 10 years probation if he testified as well, because he told them that Kevin told him that he held the gun out straight and then went boom, boom, boom. So Kevin, Pete, Chris, and Derek were all being charged with premeditated first-degree murder, but Pete ended up pleading guilty and was being sentenced to only 32 years. Now, Derek and Chris did the same and were given life, but none of them had to go to trial because they were all willing to point the finger at Kevin Foster. Investigators really wanted this because it could mean that they could sentence Kevin to death. And Kevin at first was given the chance to only be sentenced to life. He was given the same kind of plea deal, but he refused. He said he believed life was a worse fate than being basically sent to Old Sparky, which was the electric chair. So his trial began on March 3rd of 1998, and his mother Ruby testified that he was home the night of the murder. However, the rest of the gang testified saying otherwise. Now, after 2 hours and 16 minutes of deliberation, the jury found him guilty and sentenced him to death. Kevin's sister was asked for a statement by a reporter, and she told the reporter to drop dead. The reporter, Jim Greenhill, talked to Kevin's mother, Ruby, who told him that she hated him. And Kevin was said to have very dead eyes at the trial. He had a very flat affect, and he was even said to point a finger gun at Mark's family and motion to kill them. 2 years later, Kevin Foster was trying to appeal this sentence. It was denied, but he claimed God knew he wasn't a murderer. But it was then found that Kevin was trying to get connections to the outside world to kill more people for them to do it for him. Well, this was reporter Jim Greenhill, who we've talked about prior. You see, after this trial, Jim began to correspond with Kevin in jail because he wanted to write a book about the whole case. And Kevin's mother, Ruby, also talked to him about going to talk to Kevin, and so he did. And he said it was really weird because he felt like Kevin and his mother kind of had this more of a girlfriend-boyfriend relationship. They were very touchy, the way they talked about each other. It was just strange to him. But then they began to talk to him about their plan. They wanted him to help them kill Brad Young, Chris Burnett, Craig Lesh, and Thomas Tyrone, and all the other members of the gang when they got released, because they had testified against him. They also wanted the judge of the trial killed as well. Now, Jim Greenhill didn't do this, thankfully. He told the police. Kevin and Ruby were charged with conspiracy to commit murder, and Ruby was given 5 years, and Kevin was given more to his sentence, but I couldn't find the exact amount. Kevin then tried saying he had inadequate representation at his trial and wanted a new one, but this was denied as well. But Derek Shields was also back in the spotlight because he was requesting clemency. You know, even the sheriff who arrested him said that basically he was under duress and he was not the shooter, so he should have gotten a lesser sentence or not been given any time at all. This was denied, so I believe Derek is still in jail at this point, and he does have a life sentence, but this is what he says today. He was interviewed in jail, and this is what he had to say.
I really didn't think they were going to go that far.
A 17-day crime spree.
I was curled in a ball on the front seat just rocking back and forth saying, oh God.
By a gang of teenagers.
All I heard was the 2 gunshots. That was it.
Ending with murder.
Did you know you were about to help kill your teacher?
I didn't think we were going to do it. I really didn't think it was going to go through. I look back all the time and, you know, I could have stopped it from the beginning. When Sweebies did finally come to the door, I turned back around and tried to follow through what I was thinking about, trying to push him out the way, and I froze. And then I took off. And then when I heard that second shot, I thought that was me. I really thought that second one was me.
But by 2017, Florida introduced a law requiring that a jury be unanimous when recommending the death penalty. So Kevin Foster then took this as an opportunity to get his death penalty removed because the jury was not unanimous when sentencing him. It was about 9-3 at his trial. But the Florida Supreme Court did deny this, and today Kevin Cooper is still on death row at the Union Correctional Institution. But do you think all members of this gang were equally as guilty? Or was Kevin Foster able to manipulate them and make them into killers? Do you think Derek is as innocent as he portrays himself to be? And why are incredible people like Mark taken from this world so soon? Why did it have to be him who came in contact with those boys that night? And why did the boys have to think that murder was the only answer? Why couldn't they just take their punishment and go? It's a heartbreaking case, one that I know can be very hard to even understand and wrap your head around. And that's why I do Kids Who Kill and Teens Who Kill. Because it is possible, unfortunately. But don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay? Bye.